Rico Alvarez was a name everyone knew in the boxing world. He was called the Titan because of his unmatched strength and quick fists. Every time he stepped into the ring, the crowd would roar with excitement. His punches were fast, his movements sharp, and his confidence endless. People said that when Rico fought, it was not just a match, it was a show of power. But behind that shining image was a man who believed he could not be stopped. Rico had grown up in a small town where life was hard. His father was a factory worker, and his mother cleaned houses to make ends meet. From a young age, Rico wanted more. He wanted to escape poverty, and boxing became his way out. He trained day and night, punching old bags filled with sand and dreaming of fame. His talent was undeniable. By the age of 20, Rico had already won several local championships. Coaches and promoters noticed him. Soon he was signed by a major boxing company. With proper training and exposure, his name began to appear in sports magazines and TV shows. Reporters loved his story, the boy from the streets who became a hero. But as fame grew, something inside Rico changed. The humility he once had slowly faded. The cheers of the crowd made him feel larger than life. He started to believe that rules were for others, not for him. Discipline, he thought, was only for those who didn't have natural talent. He relied on his power and instinct, ignoring the advice of his trainers who told him to focus on control and patience. Rico's rise continued. He knocked out champions one after another. Each victory made him more confident and more arrogant. He started missing training sessions, showing up late to practice and arguing with anyone who disagreed with him. When his coach reminded him about respect and discipline, Rico laughed. "Coach," he said one day, "discipline doesn't win fights and power does." His coach, an old man named Victor, shook his head. "Power without control is just destruction, Rico," he warned. But Rico wasn't listening anymore. He had fans, money, luxury cars, and everything he once dreamed of. The man who used to walk to the gym in torn shoes was now surrounded by photographers and bodyguards. As time passed, Rico became known not only for his wins, but also for his attitude. He talked back to reporters, mocked his opponents before fights, and bragged about his lifestyle. Many respected his skill but disliked his pride. He believed he was untouchable, both in the ring and outside it. One day, Rico got an invitation to an international boxing tournament in Egypt. The event was grand, bringing together fighters from around the world. For Rico, it was another chance to show off his dominance. He arrived with his team, dressed in designer clothes, smiling confidently at the cameras. The tournament took place near Cairo, close to ancient historical sites. The organizers had arranged a visit for the athletes to the Great Pyramids and tombs. It was meant to be a cultural experience, a chance for the champions to see history and learn about the past. Rico, however, didn't care much about history. "I'm not here for old stones," he joked to his teammates. "I'm here to make history myself." Everyone laughed except Victor, who still traveled with him despite the growing distance between them. The first night of the event, Rico won his match easily. His opponent barely lasted 3 rounds. The crowd cheered and Rico raised his arms proudly. After the match, there was a celebration in the hotel lobby. Music played, fans gathered for autographs, and Rico enjoyed every minute of it. He smiled for photos, cracked jokes, and basked in attention. Later that evening, one of his teammates suggested visiting a famous tomb site nearby. It was a special place where ancient guards once protected the resting grounds of kings. The site was closed at night, but Rico, feeling adventurous, decided they should go anyway. "Who's going to stop us?" he said with a grin. "We're world champions." Victor tried to stop him. "Rico, it's not allowed. There are guards there. It's a sacred place," but Rico brushed him off. "Relax, old man. We'll just take a look and leave." As the night grew darker, Rico and his small group drove to the tomb site. The air was still and the desert wind blew softly. The moonlight made the sand glow faintly, creating a mysterious and beautiful scene. When they reached the gate, they saw a man standing near the entrance, a security guard in a simple uniform. The guard, named Hassan, was an older man with calm eyes. He stood firmly holding a flashlight. "Good evening," he said politely but firmly. "The site is closed for the night. Please come back tomorrow morning." Rico smiled confidently. "Come on, my friend," he said. "We just want to take a quick look." "No harm done." Hassan shook his head. "Rules are rules, sir. This place is not open at this hour." Rico's friends laughed quietly. One of them whispered, "He doesn't know who you are, Rico." Rico stepped closer, his pride shining through. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. Hassan nodded politely. "Yes, I know. You are the boxing champion. But here, everyone follows the same rule." That sentence touched something in Rico's ego. For the first time, someone had spoken to him without admiration or fear. The quiet authority in the guard's voice made him feel challenged. His friends waited to see what he would do. Rico felt the heat of embarrassment rising. All his life, people moved out of his way. No one had ever told him no so calmly. But here stood a man in a plain uniform, unshaken and respectful. Victor arrived just then, slightly out of breath from following them. "Rico," he said softly, "let's go back. It's not worth it." Rico hesitated for a moment. Inside, he felt a strange mix of frustration and confusion. He wanted to show strength, to prove that no one could stop him. Yet something about the guard's calmness made him uneasy. He didn't realize it then, but this simple encounter would change his life forever. The guard's words echoed in the quiet night. "Discipline, sir. That is what keeps the world in order." Rico said nothing. His pride battled his conscience. His teammates shifted awkwardly. Victor stood nearby, watching with worried eyes. Finally, Rico turned away and walked back to the car, pretending not to care. But deep down, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Respect mixed with shame. When he reached the hotel, he couldn't sleep. The image of the guard standing tall in the desert kept replaying in his mind. The man's voice, steady and respectful, echoed in his thoughts. Rico didn't understand why it bothered him so much. He was used to people praising or fearing him, not calmly correcting him. That night, he stared at the ceiling and thought about his journey. From a poor boy with a dream to a man drowning in his own pride. He didn't know it yet, but the lesson he refused to learn from his coach was about to return in the most unexpected way. This was the moment his path toward discipline truly began. Not in the ring, not through victory, but through a quiet confrontation with a humble man who stood for respect and order. Rico closed his eyes, still restless. Tomorrow would bring headlines, cameras, and cheers again. But deep inside, a tiny spark of change had already started to glow. The next morning, Rico woke up feeling heavy. Even though he had slept in a soft hotel bed, his mind was restless. The memory of the night before wouldn't leave him alone. The calm face of the guard, Hassan, and his steady voice saying, "Discipline keeps the world in order," replayed again and again. Rico tried to shake it off, telling himself it was nothing, but deep down, he knew it had touched something inside him. The day began with reporters surrounding him in the lobby. Cameras flashed as they asked questions about his victory. Rico smiled for the cameras, hiding his unease behind confidence. He posed, laughed, and gave short answers, but his mind was far away. When Victor saw him distracted, he walked closer and asked quietly, "Still thinking about last night?" Rico frowned. "I don't know why it's bothering me. I just wanted to see the place. The guard made it sound like I was breaking some great law." Victor smiled sadly. "You were not just breaking a rule, Rico. You were ignoring respect. Sometimes respect teaches us more than any win." Rico looked away. "Maybe," he said, ending the conversation. Later that afternoon, Rico had another press event. Everyone praised him as the titan of the ring. The more they admired him, the more his pride began to grow again. The guard and his words started to fade from his thoughts. Rico began to think the man was just another obstacle, someone trying to stop him from doing what he wanted. That evening, another celebration was arranged. This time it was bigger and louder. The hotel's rooftop was filled with lights, music, and famous guests. Rico enjoyed being the center of attention once more. People surrounded him, asking for photos and telling him how unbeatable he was. Every compliment added fuel to his ego. As the night went on, one of his teammates, Leo, leaned close and said, "Hey, Rico, remember that guard from last night? Let's go back there. We'll show him who you are. You're the champion of the world, not some tourist he can order around." Rico laughed at first but didn't answer. The idea sounded foolish, but a small voice inside him whispered that maybe facing the guard again would make him feel powerful again, like he had control. He was tired of that uneasy feeling the man's calmness had left in him. An hour later, against Victor's advice, Rico and a few teammates left the hotel again. The desert night was quiet and peaceful, and the stars shone brightly above them. Rico wore his jacket loosely, his hands in his pockets as they walked toward the same tomb site. When they arrived, the place looked almost the same, dark, silent, and still. The same guard was there, standing near the gate, his flashlight in hand. He recognized Rico immediately but said nothing. He simply straightened his posture and waited. Rico stopped a few steps away. "You again," he said, half smiling. "Still guarding old rocks, my friend?" Hassan's face stayed calm. "It is my duty," he replied. "And it is your duty to respect the rules." The other men chuckled quietly, but Hassan did not react. He kept his gaze steady, polite yet firm. His calmness made Rico feel small, as if the man saw through his pride. Rico didn't like that feeling at all. Leo whispered from behind. "He's acting like he owns the place. Teach him a lesson, Rico." Rico's jaw tightened. He didn't want to lose face in front of his friends. He stepped closer, his voice sharper now. "You don't understand who you're talking to, old man. I'm Rico Alvarez, and world champion." "I know who you are," Hassan said softly. "But here we are all just people. Rules are not made for fame. They are made for respect." The words hit Rico harder than he expected. He felt cornered, not by force, but by truth. It was as if the man was holding up a mirror to his behavior. Rico could feel his heartbeat rise. The situation was becoming tense, though Hassan remained completely still. The desert wind blew softly, brushing against their clothes. There was no sound except the rustling sand and the distant howl of a stray animal. Then, without thinking, Rico took a step even closer. His pride was louder than his reason. "Do you think you can talk to me like that? Do you think I'm just another tourist?" "I think," Hassan said, "you are a man who has lost his peace." That sentence pierced through Rico's pride. The truth in it was unbearable. He reacted without thought, his emotions boiling over. His hand moved before his mind could stop it. A quick, impulsive motion driven by anger and shame. The next moment was silent. Hassan stumbled slightly but stood upright again. His expression didn't change much. He looked at Rico with disappointment, not anger. Rico froze where he stood. The weight of what he had just done hit him immediately. The quiet night suddenly felt too loud, too bright, too real. His teammates went still. Leo whispered, "Rico, what did you just do?" The flashlight dropped to the sand, its beam pointing toward the ground. Hassan slowly picked it up and looked at Rico. "You are strong," he said calmly, "but strength without control is weakness." Those words felt heavier than any punch Rico had ever taken. He opened his mouth to speak but couldn't find words. His hands trembled slightly. The champion who had faced countless opponents in the ring now felt smaller than ever before. Before anyone could react further, a passing security vehicle arrived. Another guard stepped out, shining a light on the group. Seeing what had happened, he quickly called for help. Within minutes, local authorities arrived. Rico didn't resist. He just stood there, staring at the sand, unable to meet Hassan's eyes again. The situation quickly became serious. Cameras from nearby tourists had captured the moment. The next day, those images and short clips began spreading online. By morning, every news channel was talking about it. World champion strikes local guard. The story spread like wildfire. Rico's sponsors started calling his manager immediately. Some expressed disappointment. Others cut ties at once. His social media accounts filled with angry messages from fans who once praised him. "We believed in you," one comment said. "You let us down." Back at the hotel, Victor sat beside him quietly. Rico's head was in his hands. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said in a low voice. "It just happened," Victor sighed. "No, Rico, it didn't just happen. Pride made it happen. You forgot what discipline means. You forgot what respect is." The words hurt more than any punishment could. Rico felt lost. Everything he had worked for seemed to be slipping away, not because of his boxing skills, but because of his attitude. Later that day, Hassan was asked if he wanted to press heavy charges. The old man thought for a long moment before answering, "No, let him face himself. That will be a greater lesson than any punishment." Rico heard those words through a translator and felt something break inside him. He realized that the man he had disrespected still showed him more honor than he had shown anyone in months. That night, as Rico sat in a quiet cell waiting for questioning, he thought about every decision that had brought him here. He remembered the first time he stepped into a boxing gym, how he promised his parents that he would stay humble, how he once believed that true strength meant control. Somewhere along the way he had lost all of that. The silence of the room pressed against him. There were no cheers, no cameras, no fans calling his name, just his own thoughts echoing in his head. Discipline keeps the world in order. Strength without control is weakness. For the first time in many years, Rico felt truly small. But somewhere inside that shame, a spark of understanding began to grow. He didn't know it yet, but this was the start of his greatest fight. Not against an opponent, but against himself. And that fight would test more than his strength. It would test his heart, his humility, and his ability to learn the true meaning of discipline. After the incident at the tomb, Rico Alvarez's life changed overnight. The fame that had once protected him now seemed fragile, almost meaningless. Reporters who had cheered his victories were now writing headlines questioning his character. Titan of the ring or tyrant outside? One article read, sponsors called to cancel contracts. Social media exploded with criticism. Fans who once adored him now expressed disappointment. At first, Rico refused to face the truth. He told himself that everyone was overreacting. It was just a mistake, he muttered. I didn't hurt anyone seriously. I'm still the champion. But deep down, he knew it wasn't that simple. The calm, steady gaze of Hassan, the tomb guard, haunted him more than the headlines. For the first time in his life, Rico realized that strength without control could destroy everything he valued. Rico's manager tried to protect him. He called in lawyers, publicists, and trainers to manage the crisis. But nothing could stop the storm. Television shows replayed the incident over and over. International news reported on it, and the boxing world buzzed with gossip. Other athletes whispered about how even champions could be careless. Rico felt pressure from all sides. The boxing commission suspended his license temporarily. He could not compete, and with that, his income stopped. The enormous houses, fancy cars, and luxury trips suddenly felt empty. Rico walked through his hotel room, looking at the trophies and medals he had collected over the years. Each one now seemed less meaningful. His victories in the ring had not prepared him for this kind of defeat, a defeat in character and respect. Victor, his longtime coach, stayed with him throughout the ordeal. Rico, he said gently, you've fought every kind of opponent, but this is the hardest fight. This is against yourself. If you learn from this, you will be stronger than ever before. Rico did not answer. He simply stared out the window at the city lights. He felt a wave of loneliness that he had never felt in the cheering crowd of a stadium. Here there were no fans, no cameras, no applause, only silence and his own thoughts. In the following days, Rico was called to appear in court. Hassan, the guard, was asked to give his statement. He did so calmly, describing what happened without anger or exaggeration. When the judge asked if he wanted to press charges, Hassan shook his head. He needs to face himself, he said simply. That is the lesson he needs most. Those words affected Rico deeply. He realized that Hassan had shown him more strength in forgiveness than he himself had shown in anger. Rico had spent his life proving that he was powerful in the ring, but now he understood that real strength included humility and control. During this time, Rico was not allowed to train for boxing professionally. He had hours to reflect each day, sitting quietly in his room, sometimes staring at nothing. He thought about his early years in the gym, about his parents who had taught him the value of hard work, and about the promises he had once made to himself. The boy who had trained on a simple punching bag and dreamed of greatness had always respected effort and discipline. Somewhere along the way, he had lost that respect for himself and others. One afternoon, Victor brought him a notebook. Write, he said. Write your thoughts, your regrets, your hopes. Put everything down on paper. It will help you understand yourself. At first, Rico hesitated. He had never been one for writing. But slowly he began to jot down his memories, his mistakes, and his feelings. He wrote about the night at the tomb, about Hassan's calmness, and about the pride that had led him to make a terrible choice. Writing forced him to slow down and face truths he had avoided. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the incident began to change Rico in subtle ways. He stopped arguing with people who tried to correct him. He began listening more carefully, trying to understand others instead of trying to prove himself. Small acts, like helping a teammate with a meal or listening patiently to a coach, felt strange at first, but over time they became natural. He also reached out to charities and community programs he had never paid attention to before. Visiting schools and youth centers, he spoke to children about his journey, the mistakes he made, and the lessons he learned. He told them that being strong in sports was good, but being strong in character was far more important. Children looked at him not just as a champion boxer, but as someone who had faced failure and learned from it. The media continued to cover the story, but Rico no longer felt trapped by it. Instead, he started giving honest interviews about what happened, showing humility instead of arrogance. People were surprised. The man who had once struck a guard was now talking about respect, patience, and self-control. Slowly, opinions began to shift. Some fans returned, inspired by his honesty and willingness to change. But Rico still had one step left. He needed to confront Hassan personally, to apologize face-to-face. For weeks he thought about what to say, worried that it might not be enough. He remembered Hassan's words. Let him face himself. Rico realized that forgiveness would not be fully complete until he showed sincerity in person. Finally, with Victor by his side, Rico traveled to the tomb site again. This time he walked slowly, respectfully, and without any ego. The night air was cool, the stars shining above. Hassan was there, watching quietly. Rico approached, keeping his eyes lowered at first. I am sorry, Rico said simply. I disrespected you. I disrespected your duty and I lost my control. I was wrong and I want to make it right. Hassan studied him silently for a long moment. Then he nodded. You have learned, he said. That is all that matters. Something inside Rico shifted completely at that moment. He felt relief, gratitude, and a quiet pride. Not the pride of fame or power, but the pride of learning, of understanding, of growth. For the first time in years, he felt at peace with himself. Over the next months, Rico focused on a new kind of training. Not only did he train his body for boxing, but he also trained his mind. Meditation, patience, reflection, and controlled practice became part of his routine. He learned to channel his energy calmly, using strength and skill together with respect and thoughtfulness. The boxing world watched him return, curious to see if the Titan could rise again. But Rico's mindset had changed. Winning in the ring was no longer just about knocking out opponents. It was about mastering himself. His movements were sharper but calmer. His punches were precise but controlled. Every fight became a demonstration not only of power, but also of discipline. Rico often remembered Hassan's calm face and steady words. He realized that real lessons often came from unexpected places, from ordinary people who acted with integrity and wisdom. The guard at the tomb had shown him that true strength was not in defeating others, but in mastering oneself. Even as Rico regained his reputation and fans returned, he never forgot the fall. He understood that discipline was not a punishment or a rule to follow blindly. It was a guiding force that helped people act with honor, respect, and thoughtfulness. He learned that power without control was empty, and fame without humility was fragile. Rico's life had changed forever. The incident that could have destroyed him became the turning point of his journey. He now faced the world not only as a champion in the ring, but as a man who had faced his own flaws, admitted them, and grown stronger because of them. For the first time in years, Rico Alvarez felt complete. Not because of applause, trophies, or victories, but because he had learned a lesson far greater than any championship, the true meaning of discipline, respect, and self-control. After apologizing to Hassan and feeling the weight of his own mistakes, Rico Alvarez began a journey that would change not only his boxing career, but his life entirely. The days of relying solely on strength and instinct were over. Now he faced the challenge of rebuilding himself, his skills, his reputation, and most importantly, his character. Rico returned to his training camp, but it was no longer the same. The atmosphere was calmer, more focused. The air smelled of sweat, leather, and determination, but there was also a quiet respect that hadn't existed before. Victor, his coach, greeted him with a nod, neither celebrating nor scolding, but silently recognizing the change that had begun. Training started differently. Rico woke up early before the sun rose to meditate and focus his mind. For years he had trained only his body, believing that power alone would carry him. Now he learned that the mind could be just as strong as the muscles. Meditation taught him patience. He learned to control his emotions, to channel anger and pride into focus and clarity. The physical training, too, changed. Every punch, every step, and every movement was deliberate. Victor taught him to slow down and analyze. "Rico," he said one morning, "a fighter without control is like a river without banks. It can flood, but it cannot guide its strength." Rico took the words seriously, realizing that mastery required both power and discipline. Outside the gym, Rico also worked on rebuilding relationships he had neglected. He reached out to former teammates, trainers, and even fans who had criticized him. He spoke openly about his mistakes, admitting his pride and recklessness. People were surprised at his honesty. Some were skeptical, but many were inspired to see a world champion show humility and a willingness to change. Rico also returned to the local community in his hometown. He spent hours visiting schools, youth centers, and sports clubs. He talked to children about discipline, respect, and the importance of controlling emotions. He shared his story not as a cautionary tale, but as a lesson in growth. Children listened, wide-eyed, amazed that a famous champion could be so humble and thoughtful. Every day, Rico felt the difference. Before, his victories had been shallow, earned through strength but often accompanied by arrogance. Now every step he took in training, every conversation he had, and every fight he prepared for carried intention. He felt stronger, not because he had more muscle, but because he had learned control. Months passed and his body grew sharper, faster, and more precise. His punches were not just strong, they were calculated. His movement in the ring became graceful yet powerful. Victor watched proudly as Rico trained with a calm intensity he had never shown before. "This is not just physical training," Victor said one day. "This is the training of a man who understands his own mind." Rico also spent time alone in reflection. He often walked near quiet rivers or sat in parks, thinking about the lessons he had learned. Hassan's calm words, "Strength without control is weakness," replayed in his mind. Rico realized that life, much like boxing, required patience, respect, and self-discipline. The moment he had lost control at the tomb was painful, but it had also been the catalyst for the most important growth of his life. As Rico's training progressed, his confidence returned, but it was different this time. He was no longer confident because people admired him or feared him. His confidence came from knowing that he had faced his flaws, admitted them, and was actively working to become a better man. It was quiet confidence, the kind that comes from self-awareness and hard work. Finally, the day came for Rico to return to competitive boxing. The world had watched his fall from grace, and now they were curious to see if he could rise again. The stadium was filled with fans and reporters, some excited, some skeptical. Rico walked to the ring calmly, acknowledging the crowd with a small nod instead of a showy wave. He felt the energy of the audience but did not let it control him. The bell rang and the match began. Rico's opponent was skilled and fast, a young fighter with nothing to lose. But Rico moved differently than before. Every punch was measured, every step calculated. He didn't rush. He didn't rely solely on power. Instead, he combined his strength with control, his skill with patience. As the rounds progressed, the crowd noticed the change. Rico was no longer just a titan in the ring. He was a disciplined master of his own body and mind. He dodged, blocked, and countered with precision. His opponent, though talented, struggled to keep up with the calm and deliberate movements of a fighter who had learned the value of restraint. When the final bell rang, Rico had won decisively, but the victory felt different. It was not just a win over an opponent. It was a win over himself, over his past mistakes and over the pride that had once nearly destroyed him. He raised his hands, not in arrogance but in quiet acknowledgement of his journey and the lessons he had learned. After the fight, reporters crowded around him. "Rico, what changed?" they asked. He smiled gently and said, "I learned that strength without discipline is nothing. I learned that control is true power, and I learned that respect is more important than any victory in the ring." The words were sincere and people felt it. Fans applauded, not just for the victory but for the man who had grown through his mistakes. His story spread quickly, inspiring others to understand that true success comes not only from talent, but from humility, patience, and discipline. Rico also visited Hassan after the match, this time with flowers and a respectful bow. "I wanted to show you that I've learned," he said. Hassan nodded. "You have," he replied, "and that is worth more than any championship." From that day forward, Rico's life continued to transform. He became a mentor to young athletes, teaching them not only how to box but how to live with integrity. He trained hard, but he also valued patience, self-reflection, and respect. His fame was still there, but it no longer defined him. Instead, his character and discipline became the foundation of his legacy. Rico understood now that the journey was never about the titles, the money, or the applause. It was about growth, about learning from mistakes, and about becoming the best version of oneself. The fall from grace at the tomb had been painful, but it had been necessary. Without it, he might have never understood the true meaning of discipline. He often reflected on the lessons he learned from Hassan, Victor, and the experiences that had humbled him. Each day became a chance to practice what he had learned: patience in training, respect for others, and control over his own emotions. These lessons extended beyond the boxing ring into every part of his life. And so Rico Alvarez, once known only for his raw power and victories, became a symbol of transformation. People admired him not just as a champion, but as a man who had faced his flaws, admitted them, and emerged stronger in character than he had ever been in the ring. His journey showed that even the strongest can stumble, but with discipline, reflection, and humility, they can rise to become truly great. After months of training, reflection, and small victories, Rico Alvarez finally returned to his hometown. The streets he had once run through as a poor boy now seemed familiar yet different. Everything felt quieter, calmer, and more meaningful. He was no longer the brash, prideful young man who relied solely on strength. He was now someone who understood discipline, respect, and patience. Rico decided to visit his old boxing gym, the place where it all had begun. The walls were lined with old posters, punching bags, and the scent of sweat and leather. Children and young athletes were training, just as he had once trained years ago. When they saw him, they stopped, amazed that the world champion had returned. But Rico walked calmly, greeting them with a warm smile instead of a boastful show. He spent hours with them, demonstrating not only boxing techniques but also teaching lessons about control and discipline. Strength is important, he told them, but it is nothing without respect and focus. A true champion is patient, humble, and aware of every action. The children listened carefully, inspired by both his words and his example. News of Rico's change spread quickly. People who had once criticized him for the tomb incident began to respect him again. They saw a man who had faced his mistakes, learned from them, and used them to grow stronger in character. Interviews, articles, and social media posts highlighted not only his victories in the ring, but also his personal transformation. Rico also maintained his connection with Hassan, the tomb guard who had unknowingly changed his life. He wrote letters, visited whenever possible, and always expressed gratitude for the lessons in humility and respect. Hassan, in turn, remained humble and proud of the impact he had on the young champion. Their bond became an example of how respect and understanding could cross all boundaries, from fame to simple duty. Back in the boxing world, Rico's return matches were different from before. His movements were precise, his strategy controlled, and his temperament calm. He no longer relied on sheer power or anger to defeat opponents. Instead, he focused on technique, patience, and timing. Every match became a lesson in discipline, both for himself and for the audience. Fans noticed the change immediately. They saw a champion who had matured, who respected his opponents, and who carried himself with humility. Commentators praised his mental strength, saying that he was not just winning matches but also demonstrating what it meant to be a true athlete. Rico's legacy expanded beyond the ring. He became a role model for discipline, perseverance, and personal growth. Despite his success, Rico never forgot the lesson that had started it all. He often returned to the tomb site in Egypt, sometimes alone, sometimes with Victor. He stood quietly, reflecting on the moment that had humbled him. He remembered the calm voice of Hassan and the lesson that true strength comes from self-control, respect, and humility. These reflections grounded him, keeping him focused on what really mattered in life. Rico also used his story to inspire others outside of sports. He spoke at schools, community centers, and even international conferences about the importance of learning from mistakes. He emphasized that failure is not the end but a step toward growth. "It is easy to win when everything goes your way," he said in one speech. "But the real victory comes when you face your flaws, admit them, and improve yourself." Over time, Rico's approach changed the way people viewed champions and athletes. He showed that true greatness was not measured by victories alone, but by the lessons learned and the character built along the way. Young athletes who followed him learned that being strong meant being disciplined, being humble, and being aware of the impact of one's actions. Rico also focused on personal relationships, something he had once neglected. He reconnected with his family, spent quality time with friends, and built stronger bonds with his team. He listened more, acted patiently, and avoided impulsive reactions. These changes made his life richer and more fulfilling, proving that the lessons of discipline reached far beyond the ring. As years passed, Rico continued to compete, but his purpose had expanded. He was no longer just fighting to win. He was fighting to inspire, teach, and set an example. He became known not only as a champion in sports but also as a champion of character. People admired him not just for his punches but for his heart, wisdom, and integrity. Every day, Rico remembered the journey that had started with a single mistake, a moment of pride and anger at a tomb guard. That incident, which could have ended his career and reputation, became the turning point that defined his life. It taught him that real discipline is about respect, self-control, and learning from one's errors. In the end, Rico Alvarez found a balance he had never known before. He combined strength with wisdom, skill with humility, and power with patience. He became a man who inspired others, showing that even the mightiest can stumble, but with reflection and discipline they can rise higher than ever. And so, the story of the boxing titan who once struck a tomb guard ended not with shame, but with growth, respect, and a legacy far greater than any championship title. Rico had learned the true meaning of discipline, and in doing so he became not just a champion in the ring, but a champion of life.